Welcome to Compact Mysteries from CompactHistories.com, the show where we try to unravel a different bite-sized mystery each week. From baffling disappearances and strange objects to unexplained events and mysterious places. This is episode 82, The Mystery of the SS Ourang Medan. The story of the SS Ourang Medan begins with a problem that should make any mystery writer sit up straight and any historian sigh heavily into their tea. We are not dealing with a confirmed shipwreck, but with a story that appears in fragments, retellings, and increasingly dramatic versions. The ship is usually described as a Dutch freighter or steamship, found adrift in Asian or Pacific waters with its crew dead and no obvious cause. Yet the vessel itself remains unverified, with researchers unable to find reliable registration records or a formal accident investigation under the name Ourang Medan. Even the name carries a useful clue. Ourang, more commonly written O-R-A-N-G, means man or person in Malay and Indonesian, while Medan is a city on Sumatra. So the name is often taken to mean something like Man of Medan. That linguistic link helps explain why later versions moved the story towards the Strait of Malacca, near Sumatra, although the earliest versions placed the supposed incident much farther away. The first known version appears to have come from 1940, not 1947 or 1948, as many popular retellings claim. It was reported in Italy by Silvio Shirley, a maritime radio operator and freelance journalist from Trieste. Then it appeared in British newspapers in November 1940, including the Yorkshire Evening Post and the Daily Mirror. Those early reports placed the incident southeast of the Solomon Islands, and did not include some of the later, more lurid details. That matters because the Ourang Medan did not simply become famous as a single report repeated faithfully. It evolved. In 1948, Dutch-language newspapers in the former Dutch East Indies published a fuller version, again linked to Shirley. By 1952, the story had appeared in the United States Coast Guard's Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council, giving it a kind of borrowed authority, even though it was presented as part of a broader article about strange maritime incidents rather than as a formal investigation. So before the dead crew, before the explosion, and before the final message that made the legend famous, the first mystery is documentary. A ship with no firm registry enters history through newspapers, hearsay, and later repetition. That weak paper trail is not a side issue. It is the doorway into the whole case. In the most famous version of the story, the Ourang Medan announces itself through radio. Somewhere in the late 1940s, a distress signal is said to have been picked up by nearby vessels. The message reported that the officers, including the captain, were dead in the chart room and on the bridge. After broken Morse code, a final message supposedly arrived: I die. Then came silence. It is a perfect ghost story line because it feels immediate, short, and horrifying. It gives the listener just enough to imagine panic aboard the ship, but not enough to understand what happened. There is no explanation, no description of an attacker, no clear mention of fire, gas, disease, pirates, or mechanical failure. Just a ship, dead officers, and one last voice vanishing into static. The problem is that the wording changes depending on which version you follow. The 1940 reports gave a different distress call. In that earlier account, the message asked ships with shortwave wireless to contact a doctor, then warned that the second officer was probably dead and that other crew members had also been killed. The final message in that version was not, I die, but the incomplete phrase, crew has, before the transmission ended. That difference is important because the I die ending seems to belong to the later, more theatrical version of the legend. It appears in the 1952 Coast Guard publication, which describes the Ourang Medan as a Dutch vessel in the Straits of Malacca in February 1948. There, the radio call is already the version most people recognize today, with dead officers, a silent ship, and the chilling final two words. The location also shifts. In 1940, the story is southeast of the Solomon Islands. In later versions, it moves to the Marshall Islands or the Strait of Malacca. These are not small adjustments on a nautical chart. They are vast distances, and they make the story harder to treat as a garbled but basically reliable accident report. Still, the distress call remains the emotional engine of the mystery. Whether it was a real transmission, a misreported incident, or a line crafted for maximum effect, it creates the next question. If other ships heard the call, who went to look? In the later and best-known version, the ships said to have picked up the distress call included the City of Baltimore and the Silver Star. The Silver Star is usually cast as the responding vessel, the ship that followed the signal, found the Ourang Medan and sent men aboard. This is where the story moves from radio mystery to physical horror. According to the 1952 account, the Ourang Medan was found adrift about 50 miles from her indicated position. The vessel was reportedly still afloat, but silent, with no living person or creature on board. The rescuers boarded expecting an emergency. Instead, they found a scene that seemed less like a maritime accident and more like the aftermath of something invisible moving through the ship. The earliest version did not name the rescuing ship, which is another detail that should make us cautious. The Skittish Library's comparison of the 1940 and later accounts notes that the Silver Star appears to have been added as the story developed. It also notes that while a Silver Star did exist, by 1948 it had reportedly been renamed SS Santa Cecilia, which complicates the neat version of events often repeated in modern summaries. That does not automatically prove the tale false. Maritime stories can become muddled, especially in wartime and post-war conditions when shipping routes, names, ownership and records could be complicated. But it does mean that the rescue scene is not supported by the kind of evidence we would want, such as a ship's log, official inquiry, port record, casualty list, or wreck report. The rescuer's role is also narratively convenient. They arrive just long enough to witness the horror, but not long enough to preserve the evidence. They see the dead crew, fail to identify a cause, attempt to prepare the vessel for towing, and then are forced away before anyone can properly investigate. In storytelling terms, it is beautifully efficient. In historical terms, it is annoyingly slippery. So the Silver Star section of the tale does vital work. It gives the story witnesses, movement, and apparent confirmation. Yet the more closely it is examined, the more the witness vessel becomes part of the uncertainty rather than a clean solution to it. The rescuers bring us aboard, but what they supposedly found only deepens the puzzle. The most disturbing image in the Ourang Medan legend is not the radio message, it is the crew. The 1952 Coast Guard account says bodies were found throughout the ship, on the decks, in passageways, in the chart house and on the bridge. They were described as lying on their backs, faces turned upward, mouths open, eyes staring, with no visible injuries or wounds. Even the ship's dog was reportedly found dead. This detail is why the story has survived. Dead crews are tragic, but not automatically mysterious. Ships can burn, sink, explode, founder, or be attacked. But a crew found dead without wounds suggests something stranger. Poison, gas, suffocation, panic, or some sudden environmental event that left little outward trace. If the account is true, the absence of wounds makes violence less likely, at least in the ordinary sense. It does not fit a boarding attack, a mutiny, or a gunfight. Nor does it sound like a gradual illness, because men are supposedly found at their posts and across the vessel. That is why toxic cargo, fumes, or carbon monoxide have become the most plausible natural explanations among those who assume there was a real incident behind the legend. One later version introduces a dying survivor, an unnamed German crewman who supposedly reached Taongi Atoll in the Marshall Islands. Before dying, he allegedly said the ship had been carrying badly stowed oil of vitriol, another name for sulfuric acid, and that poisonous fumes from broken containers had killed the crew. That part of the story again comes through retelling, not through a formal inquiry, but it shows how the legend tried to explain its own horror. There are other possible explanations if we treat the story as loosely based on a real disaster. A smouldering fire or boiler fault could have released carbon monoxide, an odorless and deadly gas. A chemical cargo could have reacted with seawater. A hidden fire could also explain why the vessel later burned and exploded. These ideas are not proof, but they sit within normal maritime danger rather than the supernatural. Yet the physical description may also be the weakest part of the story. It reads like horror literature, staring eyes, gaping mouths, dead dog, bodies frozen in terror. Without photographs, medical reports, names, or a recovered wreck, the scene cannot be tested. The bodies are the heart of the legend, but they are also hearsay. And then, very conveniently, the ship itself is said to have destroyed the evidence. The final act of the Ourang Medan story is almost too neat. The rescuers board the vessel, find the dead, discover no clear cause, and prepare to tow the ship. Then a fire breaks out, commonly placed in the number 4 hold. The boarding party retreats, the ship explodes, and the Ourang Medan sinks, taking with it the bodies, cargo, logs, and any chance of a proper investigation. This is the point at which the story becomes both more dramatic and less useful as evidence. A fire in a hold is entirely plausible on a cargo ship, especially if hazardous materials were present. Fire could also explain why rescuers could not inspect the vessel fully. But in mystery terms, the explosion removes everything that might have settled the matter. No autopsies, no cargo manifest, no radio log from the doomed vessel, no hull inspection, nothing left but the story. The hazardous cargo theory tries to join all the pieces together. If chemicals were badly stowed, fumes might have killed the crew. If seawater entered the hold, it might have reacted with cargo. If volatile materials were aboard, the later fire and explosion might follow naturally. Some versions speculate about smuggled chemicals, potassium cyanide, nitroglycerin, or even wartime nerve agents. Those theories are dramatic, but they remain theories, and some rely on claims that are not supported by documentary evidence. The post-war setting helped those ideas flourish. In the years after the Second World War, Asia and the Pacific were full of displaced weapons, damaged infrastructure, black market trade, demobilized personnel, and rumors of secret cargoes. A mystery ship carrying dangerous chemicals outside normal shipping channels sounds possible in that world. It also sounds exactly like the sort of story that could grow in that world, feeding on real anxieties. Carbon monoxide is less exotic but perhaps more realistic. A boiler fault, smouldering fire, or poor ventilation could kill without leaving obvious wounds. It could also leave rescuers baffled if they arrived after the gas had dispersed. The difficulty is that this explanation requires a real ship and a real boarding, and that is precisely what the records fail to establish. So the explosion does not solve the case, it protects the legend. It turns an unverifiable event into an unsolved one by making the absence of evidence part of the plot. That leaves the final question. Did something terrible happen aboard the Ourang Medan, or was the real creation not a ghost ship, but a ghost story? The most responsible answer is that the SS Ourang Medan remains unconfirmed. That is not as satisfying as poison gas, smugglers, secret weapons, or a doomed radio operator whispering his last words into the void, but it is where the evidence points. Researchers have struggled to find the ship in official registers, and no clear accident investigation, casualty list, wreck record, or contemporary rescue log has emerged to anchor the story. What we do have is a trail of printed versions. The story appears in 1940 in Italy and Britain, changes in 1948 in Dutch-language newspapers, then reaches a wider English-reading audience through later publications. The 1948 Dutch account itself reportedly ended with a cautious disclaimer, admitting that there was no other data for the mystery and that the whole thing might be a thrilling romance of the sea, while also saying Shirley insisted it was authentic. That is wonderfully awkward and very useful. It shows that skepticism was present early, not just added by modern debunkers. The shifting geography is especially damaging. Solomon Islands, Marshall Islands, Strait of Malacca. These are not slight reporting errors. They suggest either repeated embellishment, confusion between different stories, or a fictional tale being reshaped to suit new audiences. The changing distress call creates the same problem. The 1940 message asks for medical help and ends unfinished. The later version gives us the unforgettable "I die." That is the version everyone remembers, which may tell us something about why it survived. Still, calling it a hoax should be done carefully. A hoax implies deliberate invention. The Ourang Medan may instead be a maritime rumour built from pieces of real fears: wartime smuggling, chemical cargoes, communication failures, lost ships, poor records, and the vastness of the sea. It may have begun as fiction, been mistaken for fact, and then repeated by increasingly respectable sources until it looked official. That is the real mystery of the SS Ourang Medan. It may not be the story of a dead crew aboard a doomed Dutch freighter. It may be the story of how a tale travels, gathering names, places, corpses, and credibility as it goes. Somewhere between Trieste, the Pacific, the Strait of Malacca, and the pages of maritime folklore, the Ourang Medan became a ghost ship in the truest sense. Impossible to board, impossible to verify, and very hard to sink. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact Mysteries, part of the Compact Histories Network. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any future episodes, and consider leaving a rating or review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find more episodes at compactmysteries.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, history, disasters, warfare, and true crime. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/mysteriescoffee to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.